I'm going to give you a nugget on Federer this morning. Federer versus Nishikori. For those of you just tuning in, Federer, I think, has pretty much devastated Kei Nishikori today. There were spots, there were times when there were uncertainties in this match. But let me say that Federer put on a marvelous display of skill, temperament, and overall all-court mastery that absolutely blew my hair back. This week, the Federer is the Pink Panther. We're calling him the Pink Panther, which is consistent with our feline metaphor. Hello, Farzan. I hope you saw the match versus Nishikori. Federer, folks, is resurrecting himself. I don't think there's any other way to say it. If some of you have not seen the Nishikori match, you need to go back and watch it. Highlights are fine, because the highlights, let me tell you, the match itself was absolutely wondrous to behold. And oh yes, the Pink Panther was purring tonight. Absolutely. Was again moving around the court so cat-like. Listen, this Federer that we saw on display today my time, tonight in Shanghai, reminds me of the Federer we saw in the Australian Open in 2017. The temperament. He was perfectly focused, only a couple of points where he was a little bit emotionally rocked, but generally the temperament, the confidence. The final score of this match was 6-4, 7-6, and let me say that Kei Nishikori put up a very impressive fight. And Nishikori, obviously, I mean, he's already had a great career and he's got a bright future ahead of him. I said yesterday, I went live yesterday, it's actually not up on the site because we had a couple of technical problems, and I might get it up a little later, although it's a little outdated now. But I said yesterday that Nishikori was not quite in the same form, or has not been in the same form that we saw him in the Australian Open of 2017, which was the last time Federer played Nishikori. Now, that went to 5 sets. That was a very competitive match. But I did predict that Federer would be able to get through Nishikori in the form that Nishikori has currently been sort of displaying. But listen, Nishikori was very impressive today. This match was all about the return, the resurrection, virtually, the resurrection of Federer. When I saw him in that tiebreak in the second set, go down, he was down 2-4. He had just, well, he was down 1-4, in fact, then he served an ace, and then they switched sides, and he took a little time to kind of take a drink. And it was a moment. It was a moment. He decided there and then, and it was not an emotional moment. He wasn't upset. He wasn't angry. He was totally focused. He took the drink and crossed over to the other side and proceeded to slay Nishikori, come back and take the match in the second set tiebreaker. And he did so using his manual of masterpieces, and it was breathtaking to behold. Forehand winner after forehand winner, then of course an ace or two in there, but he totally dominated. He turned in to the diamond. And really the last time I saw that, I saw a hint of that in the match against Wawrinka at the Rogers Cup. I did. But really the last time I really saw the diamond in Federer, the Federer who by force of will just scoops up matches. Before anybody can understand what is happening, the man scoops up the matches, and it's just so beautiful to watch him work. So beautiful to watch this Pink Panther this week. All hail Federer. We love you. In Fed we trust. In Fed we trust. He was just a dominator today. He was mind-blowingly good. Sure, there were some unforced errors, but there were 43 winners. 21 beautiful forehand winners, 12 masterful backhand winners, 10 aces. Nishikori hit, by comparison, a very small amount of winners, 27 winners. Federer was 21 for 31 in his net points. As he's been showing all week, he's just particularly sort of deft at the net this week. I believed those first two matches, folks, were signs of promise. I believe they gave me optimism because I saw Federer come through in those deciders. I saw him decide. When he can decide, and he's feeling these courts well, you could tell that too. The first two matches, folks, were against very tough competitors. Bautista Agut was playing the best tennis of his career. I think that's a pretty indisputable proposition. And Medvedev is a rising star in every sense of the word, to a much greater extent, I would argue at this point, than someone like Tsitsipas. Why? Because Medvedev is racking up titles. And he just got his first 500 level title. He's going to get a Masters 1000 title. He's probably going to win a Grand Slam. He is a young gun with very impressive artillery, a very stolid, focused temperament. I like the man. I like Medvedev. But Federer's victories over Medvedev and Bautista Agut gave me optimism. They gave me hope and optimism because I saw a hint. There was something about the way he was playing against those two players. Set aside the Nishikori match. But even against Medvedev and Bautista Agut, there was something about the way he was playing that reminded me for the first time of the Australian Open in 2017. It reminded me of that Federer. For so many of us, that was the original inspiration in a way. The comeback, the resurrection of Federer in 2017. And he was on the court again with Nishikori. And I think, folks, let me submit to you that I believe that Federer is resurrecting himself again right here before our eyes. Listen, Djokovic, who I'm calling the proctologist, he's the surgeon, he's the cheetah, he's the hyena, but he's also the proctologist. If you want to put a fine point on the surgeon, well, he's the neutralizer first. And that's really the most descriptive. But he's also the proctologist. They are on a collision course, which means that Djokovic is going to usurp Federer as world number 2. All Djokovic has to do is reach the final. He can lose to Federer in the final, and he will still usurp Federer as number 2, and that just has to do with how the rankings points work. Djokovic has all upside here, having no points to defend, whereas Federer is the defending champion. Excuse me while I drink my morning shake. I'm beyond my coffee. I'm beyond my totally amped up, stimulated phase. I was jumping around the living room today. Federer was playing some wonderful tennis that had me all worked up. I was jumping and screaming, and my wife's telling me to shut up. My son didn't know what to make of it. He never does, but he knows Federer, and he knows that in Federer we trust. But Federer and Djokovic are on a collision course. They are absolutely on a collision course. Here's what Federer needs to do. Here's what he needs to do in his following matches. And one of the suggestions that I made yesterday was, very good question, Ollie. Let me get to that. One of the suggestions I made yesterday was that Federer will or can improve. He looks to be on the upswing. Again, to reiterate, I was given hope by Federer's performance in those first two matches, notwithstanding the sets that he dropped. Wonderful to see you, Patrick. And on such an occasion to meet folks, Fed fans, come hither. I'm so inspired. This week, to sort of share, to have morning with Federer. In Boston, it's morning. to have these, morning time coffee experiences with Federer while I'm getting up, I'm stimulated. It's awesome. And because of course we lost touch with Federer for a while. He hasn't been playing, and this week has just been so wonderful in that respect to see him out there. And I came to the conclusion a while back, but particularly this week, and this is the conclusion. I don't care whether Federer wins anymore. I love watching him play so much. And if he stays cool, if he's a cool cat, if he's the Pink Panther and in that cool mode where he's not shaken, he doesn't get emotionally rattled like we saw, for example, in Indian Wells and a number of other matches against Coric, I think, in Halle. If he stays cool, I just love watching him. And I don't care whether he loses because he's still the most beautiful player that's ever played the game. He's still... And that doesn't hinge on whether he wins or loses. Let's get to this question about the year-end number one, which is a legitimate question. I know folks want to think about that. I think Federer is not really in the running for that, so it's not really... We'll have to see. I mean, if he played Paris, there are some permutations that I believe can put Federer in the running, given... I'm not sure about that. I think I remember reading something. I haven't done all the math, but I think I remember reading it's almost a mathematical impossibility for Federer to end the year at number one. But my prediction for that is that Djokovic will be the year-end number one. Because, again, it's just the way the dynamic is playing out. He has nothing to defend. It's all upside going forward. So it really looks like Djokovic will be able to do it. We will see. We will see. I've got a comment. Federer's racket felt like a wand waved by the magician. Loved the backhand. Great comment. Yes, the backhand. Well, that's part of why people are going to think I'm crazy, maybe. I don't know. It's part of why he's reminding me of the Federer of 2017. At the Australian Open, at Indian Wells, at Miami. That's the Federer I'm seeing right now. Are any of you seeing that? But, of course, I was seeing him in the matches with Medvedev, too, just hints of it. And I suggested he could improve over the course of this tournament. He could find his rhythm, as Federer puts it. He could get into the Fed funk and start to get funky. Well, he was getting funky today. He was getting very funky today. But one element of this, and one of the chief reasons why he does look to be coming into the same kind of form that we saw at the Australian Open in 2017, is that backhand. He was really swinging through those backhands, folks. The top spin on those backhands was quite impressive, too. I think I have a stat on that. Yeah, the backhands were averaging 40 revolutions per second with the top spin, which was far more than Nishikori's conceitedly devastating two-hander that he hits sometimes a little flatter, but he can hit it with some top spin as well. Federer was coming up over the top of those backhands and really swinging through. I haven't seen those kind of backhands, really. There've probably been one or two here and there, but in terms of seeing them coming with the kind of regularity they were today, haven't seen it since the beginning of 2017. So here is my question for you tennis fans. Could it happen again? Could Federer come roaring back to dominate the tennis world, even when Novak Djokovic exists, even when the proctologist is in the equation? Well, this week is going to test that proposition. It's going to be a big test of that proposition. As I said yesterday, Federer needs this tournament. Now, I just said that I don't care if Federer wins. He's so beautiful that I just want him to play, and that's true. But I'm talking about in terms of another set of factors that, the objective, the numbers, the GOAT debate, etc. He does need this title. He needs this 1,000 level title, and he needs to disbar the proctologist in doing so. He needs to do that. He must do that this week. What do you guys think? What do you guys think about that proposition? Federer really needs this. Now, again, if he doesn't do it, And he's got some tough customers coming. Listen, Coric knows how to press Roger's buttons. But on the other hand, the way that he's done it, the way that Coric has done it in the past, which is very much about hitting to Roger's feet. And that can be done by hitting deep into the court, to the baseline, particularly on returns of serve. Djokovic does this a lot as well. Or it can be done by catching Federer in the midcourt, because Federer does have that forward momentum to his game. Kind of wasn't there quite as much today with Nishikori as it was in the previous matches, which suggests to me, given the recent evidence. I mean, think about this. At the one extreme, you have the Millman match, which was a disaster from one perspective. It was beautiful. It was aesthetically pleasing, and it was something of a museum piece. It was like a historical museum piece from 1969. It was wonderful to watch. But it was a disaster in terms of its effectiveness in that approach. So that's just maximum turbo on steroids forward momentum, and that doesn't work. You need to be a little more sensitive to the situation and the circumstances, okay? So, in the last couple of matches against Medvedev, and I've reverted back to Medvedev, which I like because it sounds more Russian. It's Medvedev. Last couple of matches with Medvedev and Bautista Agut, Federer was engaging in some really forward play, but it was dialed back from Millman. It was tempered by judgment and decision, by wisdom, by paying attention to the circumstances and responding. The chameleon. This is the chameleon. Now, the chameleon comes forward, don't get me wrong. But the chameleon is responsive to the situation, and he looks for the right times to come forward rather than doing it all the time. He looks for the right opportunities to execute the drop shots rather than doing them over and over again. So it's about the variety, and it's about being sensitive to the circumstances. I'll talk about Medvedev, Patrick. That's a good question, and I just actually stated, I think it was before you came on, is that I like Medvedev. Medvedev is on the upswing. He's on the rise, and to my mind, he's a more promising tennis figure and star than even Stefanos Tsitsipas right now. Why? Maybe Dominic Thiem's in another kind of category. He's a little older, but with respect to Tsitsipas doesn't have any titles. But we are back to the Federer, and I kind of lost my train of thought there. There's so much good to say about this match in terms of what Federer did. But I was talking about his forward momentum. Well, today, he dialed it back a little further, which suggests, in other words, there was forward momentum for sure. There's a lot of net points. He was doing well at the net, but he was remaining sentient and sensitive to the circumstances and the different kinds of dynamics that were emerging within points, rather than trying to just kind of edge forward all the time. But in any case, and this is back to the previous point, Coric has been able to outdo Federer in the past by hitting to Federer's feet, and then the question becomes, what's Federer's answer to a shot to his feet? Now, if his footwork is firing on all cylinders, then he does have answers to shots at his feet. But it can be in the midcourt, because if Federer is coming forward, then Coric, can situate his shots appropriately. At a number of times in the Halle final, Federer was approaching. Coric would, again, hit right fairly low sometimes over the net, but especially just right to his feet. And Federer, his footwork was kind of out of joint a little bit in that match, and it was not firing on all the cylinders, and so he was having trouble. Djokovic has given Federer some problems with the same strategy. In fact, Coric, I think, borrowed that strategy from Federer, but it's a strategy that works against most players if you can it's nice work if you can get it. It's a hard to execute, very difficult strategy, but if you can do it, it works particularly well against Federer. But that has to be assuming that Federer's footwork is not is not firing on all cylinders, as I've said 3 times now. I'll try to stay away from that metaphor. But if his footwork isn't working, then Federer could have some problems. But this week, again, Federer can do 2 things to avoid the awkward shots to the feet from Coric. He can prevent Coric from having the time to calibrate those shots. He can prevent Coric from executing those kinds of shots by keeping Coric off balance in the various brilliant ways that Federer does. But he can also employ his deft footwork to run around those shots or to just kind of get out from under them so he can get a little leverage, and he was doing that wonderfully today. But again, we want forward momentum from Federer, but not too much. We want him to stay sensitive to the situation and the circumstances. And I believe that, depending on what happens tomorrow, we might see a very forward-moving Federer or not. It just depends on what Coric can come up with. But listen, the trajectory and evolution of Federer's play in this particular tournament this year, I think, is a very promising one, folks. I'm very happy and optimistic as the Fed fan part of me, and a few of you are probably going to come on and give me a hard time about this, but I do feel like the situation looks quite promising at this point. At the very least, we can say that Federer put on a tremendous display today. First, in terms of the temperament, great to see you, Michelle, and I'm glad to hear you're a Medvedev fan. Again, me too. I'm the fan of a lot of tennis players. Possibly, if you pressed me into a corner and cross-examined me on this, maybe I would say that Federer is my favorite player. But, at the top of the heap. But, I have a lot of favorite players, and I'm a fan of a lot of these players on the tour. I'm a fan of everyone who wins. I'm a fan of, in a way. So I do believe, however, that the evolution of Federer's play, just in the context of this tournament, is very promising. I think this match with Coric could be another test for Federer. Listen, Coric has a bit of confidence coming into this. The last time they played, Coric was able to beat Federer, and on a fast surface as well. Remember, back in Halle on the turf. Well, this surface is playing fairly fast in Shanghai as well. Federer seems to be, again, getting a feel for it, and that has developed over the course of the week. So the match with Coric is going to be a good one to watch. Again, I'm going to wake up. I'm so happy in the morning these days because it just gives me something to another reason to wake up in the morning. Not that I don't have other reasons to wake up, but it just kind of puts a beautiful shine and brilliance on my mornings to watch Roger Federer, to drink some coffee, and to observe and experience what's happening here. It's been great to watch him. The Pink Panther is the right way to refer to him. He's got the pink top. The big question is, I think the safe prediction is for Federer to push through Coric. It might take dropping a set, but Coric is a test in a way that Nishikori wasn't. Coric is playing well this week. He has a demonstrated ability to take Federer out of his rhythm, to kind of route the Federer configuration of shots, and he has a demonstrated ability to do that when Federer is in a situation where he can let him. Now, if Federer can get through Coric, again, it's going to be more evidence that he can push through Coric very cleanly. Well, that's going to be evidence. Think about it, folks. The last time he played Coric was last 2 times. First at Indian Wells. Well, that was the beginning of Federer's very strange period, right? Where he just could not deliver clutch tennis. He was all scraggly with the beard. He was getting a little soft in the middle. I think he was having some digestion issues. But he was a little grumpy in that tournament, and I've said before that I know certain other people were wont to say that Federer grumpy, we want a grumpy old goat, but I very strongly disagree with that. We do not want a grumpy old goat. I've even, in fact, turned myself around on that point. We don't want a grumpy old goat. We want a focused, unemotional goat that can produce both the chameleon and the diamond, both the sort of hyper-responsive player and the player that through force of will can just snatch up a win. And that's what he did with Nishikori today. He just snatched up that match, didn't he? And it happened. Go back and watch. It happened in the tiebreaker. They were crossing over. I believe it was at 1-4. Maybe it was 2-4, and they were crossing over at 2-4. But Federer decided, he was behind by a mini break. He decided, he took a little time to take a drink, and that was actually, I think he's not supposed to do that. Of course, they let the players do that, but he did take a few seconds. And you can see what happened. It was not an emotional few seconds. It was not emotional at all. He was very focused, but you can see that he just decided, and through force of will, he scooped up that match, and it was a true sight to behold. So the big question is, my prediction is that he will get through Coric. The question is, can Djokovic get through Zverev? That could be a very competitive match as well. The truth is, we have some fantastic semifinals lined up here, folks, and I hope that we can share the experience. They're going to be starting tomorrow morning, of course, and this tournament will be running through the weekend. I will try to come on and do a live stream tomorrow, and enough because again, we have this. Patrick, I think Zverev could do well. He's been coming through his opponents this week in a fairly clean way. Remember, he had Basilashvili, who just defeated Del Potro, right? In the final of, I'm sorry, remind me of the name of the tournament. It was just last week. But he's also defeated De Minaur, and he's also now just defeated Kyle Edmund. He's had a fairly rough, it's not been easy sledding for Alexander Zverev. He's coming through in straights, or at least the match with Edmund was. Djokovic seems to be sailing through as well, folks. He kind of shut Anderson out in that tiebreaker. It was Beijing, thank you. But that was an impressive win. Basilashvili is an up-and-comer as well, so Zverev looks strong. The Djokovic versus Zverev semifinal will be fantastic. I think that's going to require that I wake up even earlier to watch it, but I might just watch the recording. Unsure how they're scheduling that. But the prediction, again, will be, what do I think about teams upset? Thanks for that question. It was disappointing, and I believe it forms part of a kind of pattern that he's had in Shanghai. Of course, he had that very impressive victory in St. Petersburg. My view is that it was a big disappointment. I was hoping to see Team do well in this tournament, and I thought that would be a kind of test for him. So we'll have to see what happens in Paris with Team, but when he's on, I stand on the proposition that Team is basically unbeatable as it stands. Now, we'll see how things pan out with Roger Federer, but I think when Team's on, like in the first set against Nadal at the U.S. Open where he bageled the great Nadal, well, I think Team's pretty much unbeatable when he's on. But you know what? He hasn't displayed the kind of consistency that a lot of Team fans have hoped for. And we're just going to have to see what happens with Dominic Thiem. One thing that we can say is that he has been a mainstay. A couple of videos back that he has actually been the recent stretch of being in the top 10, that is the longest of any of the current players in the top 10. Of course, there are other players that have been in the top 10 longer for the course of their careers or whatever, but the current stretch of not basically not being out of the top 10, being inside the top 10 for a stretch of time, team is among the top players. I think he's been in the top 10, possibly even for longer than Nadal. Maybe Nadal has him on that. But Team has a very great record, and he's been recording some fantastic results this year, and we look forward to watching Dominique Thiem. He definitely is one of my favorite players. But tournament, of course, on the horizon, it'll be Federer versus Coric. Coric beat Federer the last time they played in Halle, but we are looking. This is my proposition, in a way, my gambit, my prediction in a way, which is that Federer is coming into form, and we are seeing very possibly a second resurrection of Roger Federer. He will most likely lose his number 2 position this week unless Djokovic strikes out before the final. But if Djokovic can get into the final, even if Djokovic loses the final, he will become the world number 2, and Roger Federer will be demoted to world number 3. But the predicted final, barring something untoward that happens in, for example, the Djokovic versus Zverev, that could be a close one, but I expect the proctologist to bend Zverev over and do his very serious work, as proctologists will do. Well, we'll see what happens, and then, of course, it's going to be the predicted final, Federer versus Djokovic. And let me say, that just excites me to think about it. That's going to be a fantastic matchup. That's the prediction, and the recent history there suggests, again, that the context, and I'll just go back to this very briefly. The context is this. Not only the Rogers Cup, where Djokovic kind of steamrolled over a very weak Roger Federer on that day, to be honest, but the context is the allegation that Federer's 2017 and going into 2018 comeback was based in substantial part on the fact that Djokovic was out of the mix. The proposition is that if Djokovic had been a player in the running, competing in tournaments during that period, we wouldn't have seen any comeback from Roger Federer. In other words, which was a great year for Federer. It would have been like 2000. There's a couple of years in there. He wasn't winning a lot of slams, but he was past his initial peak. He's past his kind of initial youthful prime, but he was winning tournaments. He was doing fine. Djokovic was in the mix. In fact, he had the entire Big Four in the mix. But the proposition is that had Djokovic been competing at the level that Djokovic is capable of competing, that Federer would not have had a conspicuous comeback